92nd Street Y online media is made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. This program, part of the Unterberg Poetry Center's 75 at 75 project, features Harold Pinter reading from his work. It was recorded on October 3rd, 1989, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
I'm going to read two things tonight. The first, an extract from a play I wrote in 1959, 30 years ago, called The Hot House. It's not terribly well known. And then, as has been said, my very short one-act play, which I wrote in 1984. Now, The Hot House takes place in an institution in which there is there seems to be a large body of inmates, although we never see them. The head of this institution is called Colonel Root, and he has two assistants, Lush and Gibbs. And it's Lush who is in the room with him on this occasion in this scene. It is Christmas Day. My cake! We haven't cut the cake. My God, it's nearly midnight. Right down the middle. I remember the day my walls used to be hung with Christmas cards. I used to walk knee-deep in presents. All my aunties and uncles popping in for a drink, a log fire in the grate, bells on the Christmas trees, garlands, flowers, floral decoration, music, flowers, floral decoration, laughter. I didn't notice a card from you, did I? Didn't expect it either, because you've no sense of decorum. It sticks out a mile. No heart. It's not so much the language, it's the attitude of mind that's nasty, unwholesome, putrid. Well, here you are. Have a piece of this cake. Go on, eat it. What are you doing? That's my cake. I can't. That's my Christmas cake. You can't spit out my Christmas cake. Stuff it. You've insulted me. You've insulted the cook. And you've insulted Jesus Christ. We've got no room for unhealthy minds in this establishment. Muck and slush. Lush! Colonel, I said you'd better watch your step. Everyone had better watch their step. I don't like the look of things. You can't trust a soul. And there's something going on here that I haven't quite gotten onto. There's something funny afoot. I can feel it. Some people think I'm old, but oh no, not by a long chalk. I've got second sight. I can see through walls. I don't mean that second sight, seeing through walls. I mean, I've got second sight and I can see through walls. And your knowledge of phytotomy, sir? Well, that's more than a passing acquaintance. I can see right through them. I can hear a whisper in the basement. I didn't waste my youth. I exercised my faculties to the hilt, and I spent a lot of time pondering. For instance, this stupid business of the world going round. It's all a lot of balls. If the world was going round, we'd be falling about all over the room. But are we? Are we? What the bloody hell do you think you're doing? Creeping up behind me like a snake, hey? You frightened the life out of me. I've come to hear your Christmas speech, sir. Well, why don't you make it? You're dying to make it. Why don't you make it? It's your privilege, sir. Well, I'm sick to death of it. The patients, the staff, the understaff, the whole damn thing. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. It's bleeding me to death. Then why do you continue? Because I'm a delegate. A delegate of what? I tell you, I'm a delegate. A delegate of what? Not only me, all of us. That bastard there, aren't you? I am. There you are. You haven't explained yourself. Who hasn't? You can't explain yourself. I can't. Explain yourself. Explain yourself, Lush. No, you explain yourself. Be careful, Sonny. You're a delegate, are you? I am. On whose authority? With what power are you entrusted? By whom were you appointed? Of what are you a delegate? I'm a delegate. I was entrusted. I was appointed. Delegated. Entrusted. Appointed. I am authorized. Thank you. Now this is one for the road, which takes place in the office of a prison. Bring him in. Hello. Good morning. How are you? Let's not beat about the bush. Anything but that. D'accord? You're a civilized man, so am I. Sit down. What do you think this is? It's my finger. And this is my little finger. This is my big finger, and this is my little finger. I wave my big finger in front of your eyes. like this. And then I do the same with my little finger. I can also use both at the same time, like this. I can do absolutely anything I like. Do you think I'm mad? My mother did. Do you think waving fingers in front of people's eyes is silly? I can see your point. You're a man of the highest intelligence, but would you take the same view if it was my boot or my penis? Why am I so obsessed with eyes? Am I obsessed with eyes? Possibly. Not my eyes, other people's eyes, the eyes of people who are brought to me here. They're so vulnerable. The soul shines through them. Are you a religious man? I am. Which side do you think God is on? I'm going to have a drink. You're probably wondering where your wife is. She's in another room. Good-looking woman. God, that was good. Don't worry, I can hold my booze. You may have noticed I'm the chatty type. You probably think I'm part of a predictable, formal, long-established pattern, i.e., I chat away, friendly, insouciant. I open the batting, as it were, in a light-hearted, even carefree manner, while another waits in the wings, silent, introspective, coiled like a puma. No, it's not quite like that. I run the place. God speaks through me. I'm referring to the Old Testament God, by the way, although I'm a long way from being Jewish. Everyone respects me here, including you, I take it. I think that is the correct stance. Stand up. Sit down. Thank you very much. Tell me something. What a good-looking woman your wife is. You're a very lucky man. Tell me. One for the road, I think. You do respect me, I take it. I would be right in assuming that. I don't know you, but you respect me. I don't know you. Are you saying you don't respect me? Are you saying you would respect me if you knew me better? Would you like to know me better? Would you like to know me better? What I would like has no bearing on the matter. Oh, yes, it has. I've heard so much about you. I'm terribly pleased to meet you. Well, I'm not sure that pleased is the right word. Intrigued. One has to be so scrupulous about language. I'm intrigued. Firstly, because I've heard so much about you, and secondly, because if you don't respect me, you're unique. Everyone else knows the voice of God speaks through me. You're not a religious man, I take it? You don't believe in a guiding light? What then? So, morally, you flounder in wet shit. You know, like when you've eaten a rancid omelette. I think I deserve one for the road. Do you drink whiskey? I hear you have a lovely house. Lots of books. Someone told me some of my boys kicked it about a bit. Well, pissed on the rugs, that kind of thing. I wish they wouldn't do that. I do, really. But you know what it's like? They have such responsibilities. They feel them. They're constantly present, these responsibilities. And so sometimes they piss on a few rugs. You understand. You're not a fool. Is your son all right? I don't know. Oh, I'm sure he's all right. What age is he, 7 or thereabouts? Big lad, I'm told. Nevertheless, silly of him to behave as he did. But is he all right? I don't know. Oh, I'm sure he's all right. Anyway, I'll have a word with him later on and find out. He's somewhere on the 2nd floor, I believe. Well, now, what do you say? Are we friends? I'm prepared to be frank, as a true friend should. I love death. What about you? What about you? Do you love death? Not necessarily your own, others, the death of others. Do you love the death of others, or at any rate, do you love the death of others as much as I do? Are you always so dull? I understood you enjoyed the cut and thrust of debate. Death, 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 death. As has been noted by the most respected authorities, it is beautiful. The purest, most harmonious thing there is. Sexual intercourse has nothing to it. Talking about sexual intercourse, does she fuck? Or does she like, you know, what does she like? What does she like? I'm talking about your wife. Your wife. You know the old joke. Does she fuck? Does she fuck? It's ambiguous, of course. It could mean she fucks like a rabbit, or she fucks not at all. Oh, well, we're all God's creatures. Even your wife. There is only one obligation: to be honest. You have no other obligation. Weigh that in your mind. Do you know the man who runs this country? No? Well, he's a very nice chap. He took me aside the other day, last Wednesday, I think it was. He took me aside at a reception, visiting dignitaries. He took me aside, me, and he said to me, he said in what I can only describe as a hoarse whisper, "Nick," he said, "Nick, that's my name, Nick. If you ever come across anyone whom you have good reason to believe is getting on my tits, tell them one thing. Tell them honesty is the best policy." The cheese was superb. Goat. One for the road. Your wife and I had a very nice chat, but I couldn't help noticing that she didn't look her best. She's probably menstruating. Women do that. You know, old chap, I do love other things apart from death. So many things. Nature, trees, things like that. The nice blue sky, blossom. Tell me, truly, are you beginning to love me? I think your wife is. Beginning. She is beginning to fall in love with me. She's on the brink of doing so. The trouble is I have rivals, because everyone here has fallen in love with your wife. It's her eyes have beguiled them. What's her name? Gila or something? Who would you prefer to be, me or you? I'd go for me if I were you. The trouble about you, although I grant your merits, is that you're on a losing wicket, while I can't put a foot wrong. Do you take my point? God, let me confess, let me make a confession to you. I have never been more moved in the whole of my life as when only the other day, last Friday, I believe, the man who runs this country announced to the country, we are all patriots. We are as one. We all share a common heritage. Except you, apparently. I feel a link, you see. A bond. I share a commonwealth of interest. I am not alone. I am not alone. Kill me. What? Kill me. What's the matter? What in heaven's name is the matter? You're probably just hungry or thirsty. Let me tell you something. I hate despair. I find it intolerable. The stink of it gets up my nose. It's a blemish. Despair, old fruit, is a cancer. It should be castrated. Indeed, I've often found that works. Chop the balls off and despair goes out the window. You're left with a happy man or a happy woman. Look at me. Your soul shines out of your eyes. Blackout lights up. A little boy. What is your name? Nicky. Really? How odd. Do you like cowboys and Indians? Yes, a bit. What do you really like? I like aeroplanes. Real ones or toy ones? I like both kinds of ones. Do you? Why do you like aeroplanes? Well, because they go so fast through the air. The real ones do. And the toy ones? I pretend they go as fast as the real ones do. Do you like your mummy and daddy? Do you like your mummy and daddy? Yes. Why? Why? Do you find that a hard question to answer? Where's Mummy? You don't like your mummy and daddy? Yes, I do. Why? Would you like to be a soldier when you grow up? I don't mind. You don't? Good. You like soldiers? Good. But you spat at my soldiers, and you kicked them. You attacked them. Were they your soldiers? They are your country's soldiers. I didn't like those soldiers. They don't like you either, my darling. Blackout, lights up. Gila is standing. Her clothes are torn. There is blood on her dress. When did you meet your husband? When I was 18. Why? 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 I just met him. Why? I didn't plan it. Why not? I didn't know him. Why not? Why not? I didn't know him. Why not? I met him. When? When I was 18. Why? He was in the room. Room? Room? The same room. As what? As I was. As I was. As I was. Room? What room? A room. What room? My father's room. Your father? What's your father got to do with it? Your father? How dare you? Fuck pig. Your father was a wonderful man. His country is proud of him. He's dead. He was a man of honor. He's dead. Are you prepared to insult the memory of your father? Are you prepared to defame, to debase the memory of your father? Your father fought for his country. I knew him. I revered him. Everyone did. He believed in God. He didn't think like you shitbags. He lived. He was iron and gold. He would die. He would die for his country, for his God. And he did die. He died for his God. You turd. To spawn such a daughter, what a fate. Oh, poor perturbed spirit, to be haunted forever by such scum and spittle. How do you dare speak of your father to me? I loved him as if he were my own father. Where did you meet your husband? In a street. What were you doing there? Walking. What was he doing? Walking. I dropped something. He picked it up. What did you drop? The evening paper. You were drunk. You were drugged. You had absconded from your hospital. I was not in a hospital. Where are you now? Where are you now? Do you think you're in a hospital? Do you think we have nuns upstairs? What do we have upstairs? No nuns. What do we have? Men. Have they been raping you? How many times? How many times have you been raped? How many times? This is my big finger, and this is my little finger. Look. I wave them in front of your eyes. How many times have you been raped? I don't know. And you consider yourself a reliable witness? You're a lovely woman. Well, you were. Your son is 7. He's a little prick. You made him so. You have taught him to be so. You had a choice. You could have encouraged him to be a good person. Instead, you encouraged him to be a little prick. You encouraged him to spit, to strike at soldiers of honor, soldiers of God. Oh, well, in one way, I suppose it's academic. You're of no interest to me. I might even let you out of here in due course. But I should think you might entertain us all a little more before you go. Blackout, lights up. Victor, the original man, is sitting dressed tidily. How have you been? Surviving? Yes. Yes? Yes. Yes. Really? How? I can't hear you. It's my mouth. Mouth? Tongue. What's the matter with it? What about a drink, one for the road? What do you say? What do you say to a drink? Drink up, it'll put lead in your pencil. And then we'll find someone to take it out. We can do that, you know. We have a first-class brothel upstairs. On the 6th floor, chandeliers, the lot. They'll suck you in and blow you out in little bubbles. All volunteers. Their daddies are in our business, which is, I remind you, to keep the world clean for God. Get me? Drink up. Drink up. You're not refusing to drink with me. Cheers. You can go. You can leave. We'll meet again, I hope. I trust we'll always remain friends. Go out, enjoy life, be good, love your wife. She'll be joining you in about a week, by the way. if she feels up to it. Yes, I feel we've both benefited from our discussions. What? What? My son. Your son? Oh, don't worry about him. He was a little prick. Thank you.
I got my paper.
Oh. I really don't know where he's gone, but I take it he'll come back.
Just forgot the audience questions. Let me say, first of all, that that performance deserves a very favorable review. It seems to be very clear, though, when I heard the selection, the excerpt from the Hot House, followed by One for the Road, that to my eyes, that was a verification of what I would consider the arc of your work, that the fact that you really have always been a political playwright. And I wondered whether you'd care to comment on that, whether you think that one can trace, in fact, from the birthday party in the Hot House all the way through for One for the Road and Mountain Language, a serious interest in your art in the world of politics.
Well, I think in the early days, which is 30 years ago, in fact, I was a political playwright of a kind. I was, but I then took a break from being so for about 17 years, actually. I wrote a lot of plays between 1970 and 1985, for example, something like that, which can't be said to be political plays. You know, things like Old Times and Betrayal and Landscape and Silence, which were concerned with memory and youth and loss and so on, and various other things, were not to do with social or political, they didn't take place and didn't concern themselves with social or political structures, whereas I think the earlier plays did. I must say I chose the two pieces to read tonight because it did strike me as quite interesting that in the Hot House in 1959, that there was a power-crazy lunatic at the center of this play, who in many ways was a farcical character, although I think a very savage and alarming and distasteful one, but nevertheless a creature that appeared to be larger than life, you know, a nut, as it were. And that play was full of jokes, as I think you saw a little of the film. And my early work was, I think, full of games and jokes and so on, but I think the distinction I would make between those plays then and these plays now is that I'm afraid that for me the joke is over. I can't see any more jokes, and I can't play any more games. Mm-hmm. So I therefore find that I'm writing shorter and shorter pieces which are more and more brutal and more overtly naked, if you see.
At the same time, though, there was great humor, and there is great humor in One for the Road. I mean, I don't think you've lost that sense of humor. I'd like to read something here from your friend Simon Gray, Simon Gray always seems to enjoy writing about you. He said, "Harold loves laughter in the theater, especially when it's provoked by his own plays. The cathedral reverence with which they're sometimes received, thanks mainly to the industrious spade work of English departments and literary journals, must be exasperating." And my question was, are you exasperated by the cathedral reverence with which people bring to your work?
Well, insofar as I detect it, yes, I am.
I mean, you seem to have great fun when you were performing.
Oh, I believe in fun. There's no question about that. But I made a terrible mistake when I was young, I think, which I've never really recovered, and that is I wrote the word pause into my first play. I really do believe that was a fatal error, because people have been reading my plays and acting my plays most of the time, really concerned, in fact obsessed with this pause, you know. And I meant it merely as a natural break in the proceedings, or even a breath. But it's come to be seen as something metaphysical.
One of the questions from the audience, in fact, in this large pile says, "What's the best thing you ever said with a pause?" I detect a pause as you're waiting to answer.
Well, I think I have to quote my wife, who is in the audience, on this, because she proposed, hope I'm going to get this right, but she said to me some years ago, what about you could do a commercial. Oh God, I've forgotten it, wait a minute. Yes, smoking. I used to smoke, and she said, you can, I'll have to ask her, I'm afraid that's not true. It was something to do with a black soprano and a pause. She could give a lecture on it afterwards, I think. However, what's my, I have no favorite, what was it, favorite stories or pause, or
what is the best thing you ever said with a pause?
No.
It's a rather intricate question, I think. I think we'll pass on to something else. Two years ago, you played Goldberg in a television production of The Birthday Party. As a young actor, you played Iago and the first murderer in Macbeth. And now we've just seen your Nicholas in One for the Road. Do you think you have a special affinity for such villainous roles?
Definitely, yes. Yes, my favorite roles, I was in English Rep, you know, as an actor for about 12 years or so, and my favorite roles were undoubtedly the sinister ones, and they get something to get your teeth into and so on. I also started from a very early age in actually hating the audience, so that's an attitude I've preserved until this very day, with the exception, naturally, of this audience. So it was very good to play sinister roles because at a very early age, because you could frighten the audience, you see. It was a continual conflict and tussle with the audience. I noticed tonight there were one or two latecomers, and I remembered it took me back many, many years ago when it was my habit to stare at latecomers. Even while playing Iago. But of course I have become serene in my middle age, and so I don't do that kind of thing anymore.
Serene?
Serene, yes, serene. Yeah.
Not immediately evident, I wouldn't say. I was curious how it feels to enact your own plays, your play as you just did. Does Pinter the playwright watch Pinter the actor? I mean, is the director staring over your shoulder? Is there any way that you can separate, individualize each one of your characters as you're doing it? Do you feel a director watching you in performance?
No, I don't think so. I'm just aware of the peril that actors, to whom I take my hat off, go through every night. It's very salutary for a writer, I think, whether he has or has not been an actor, to enter into that sea, which is really going like that. You know, there are no certainties in performing at all. You don't know what's going to happen next, although you try to plan. You know, and something happens on the back of your head, and you have a curious structure available to you. But you can slip down so many keyholes, really, or abysses in the course of that journey, so that it's a very perilous. It really is an adventure, I think. But to sustain it every night is an extraordinary feat, I must say. That was me, I think.
Having been an actor, has that helped you? Seems to be a critical response from the balcony, I believe. Having been an actor, does that help you being a playwright? Is there a direct correlation there from your acting early? No.
I've no idea, really, quite honestly.
I think we'll... Ending that part of the discussion, I think we'll go to the next question. Oddly enough, the first card here says, "Sir, discuss intimidation." I wouldn't know how to respond to that myself, but is there a response? I think perhaps we've seen enough intimidation already. Let's go on to the next question, if you would mind. Can the theater change the world? Pause. How?
Well, I'd prefer to go back to the question about intimidation. And do you mind if I do so, in fact?
Fine.
I think we are extremely intimidated by the countries in which we live. Certainly, we're pretty intimidated in dear old England, I have to tell you that. I mean, many people live a life of intimidation. I mean, they are, and even if they don't realize it, in my view. But many of them do. Certainly, the millions that have no money and are being not only dispossessed, but are effectively being disenfranchised as well by various governmental techniques and tactics, are essentially citizens without a role, and undermined, bewildered, and intimidated. And I think, and this is to do with a very successful pattern of lies which government actually tells to its citizens, and I have to say, which is repeated in so much of the media. So that you're told, for example, you're a happy man, this is a wonderful society, everything is fine, you're doing very well. We're told that this is a free country. We're told that we live in a democracy. We are told that other people suffer various ills, various oppressions, of which we are free. And we say, oh yes, that must be the case, yes. It seems that is the case. And I see it most strongly embodied, in fact, in this country's relationship with Central America. Where the actual facts simply do not correspond to the language used about those facts. What the language used by the media, I think here, and certainly the administration of this country, and echoed indeed, of course, all along the line by the government of England, what the language does is actually, in my view, debase itself. We're talking about a debased language in which the lie is simply automatic and quite persuasive and infinitely pervasive. I mean, it pervades the tradition in which we live, and certainly for the last 40 years this has been the case, I think, in what we call our Western democracies, in which, and referring specifically again to Central America, we are told that there is, for example, a totalitarian dungeon existing in Nicaragua and democracies existing in El Salvador and Guatemala. Now, it so happens that I'm sure I'm not alone in knowing certain of the real facts, which are these. Even if I'm not alone, rather if I am alone, and some of you don't know the real facts, I'd be very happy to tell you. And those are these, that in the last 15 years, nearly 300,000 people have died in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And this is precisely, in my view, caused or brought about by the foreign policy of this country. I remind you that Now, while this has been going on, our attention has been drawn very successfully, I think, to the other side, what used to be called the Iron Curtain, now breaking down. And so we have been told, I repeat quite simply, and I shall stop in a moment, because I know you don't want me to give a sermon on this subject. But I just want to make one or two facts absolutely clear. And it's as I see myself as not only an actor and an entertainer, but since you've been so kind to invite me here, I'm also a citizen of the world in which I live. And I take responsibility for that. I really insist upon taking responsibility and understand my responsibilities quite precisely as actually trying to find out what the truth is and what actually happens. And so that what I've found is that we're really at the bottom of a blanket of lies, which unfortunately we are either too indifferent or too frightened to question. I'll leave it there for the moment.
There's one other political question here. Would Mr. Pinter comment on the relatively weak response by the British literary community to the Ayatollah's death sentence on Salman Rushdie? I know Mr. Pinter was an exception and did speak out, but what about his colleagues? For example, a public reading was held in New York, but nothing comparable took place in London.
Well, firstly, yes, I'm absolutely prepared to address myself to that question. It is, I must say, totally untrue. The response of the English literary community has been very, very strong indeed. There have been all sorts of things happening. A public reading at that point was not considered to be the most helpful thing at the time. But in response to English Pen, which represents English writers, and the Writers' Union, and all other bodies joined together in a body called Article 19, and many representations were made to the Muslim community, to the government, and there has been infinite support for Salman Rushdie in England, and that's the one. And that's also, I have to say, to correct another a balance, that I think this is the one thing that when I was part of a delegation which went to 10 Downing Street the day after the death threat came through, to Mrs. Thatcher to ask her to provide police protection for Salman Rushdie, I have to say that after a couple of days she did, and that protection is still in existence. And this, it does seem to me, is where police power is being properly used to protect the citizens of the country, whereas a good deal of the time I certainly find in England that police power is now very, very dangerously abused. And the actual powers given to the police by government, I know I'm veering away, are growing more dangerous every day. But however, in this case, the English government behaved properly, and so I believe all the writers in England are absolutely behind him.
I would like for a moment to go back to One for the Road, and if you could talk at all about the genesis of that play, whether there was one single incident that sparked it off, or one image that you had.
Well, there was. The play, I think, had been... The world in which the play inhabits had been not only on my mind for many, many years, but I had actually, I think, expressed one way or the other in the early plays. For example, can I come back to that question in a moment? At this moment, the CSC Repertory Company are rehearsing two plays of mine downtown, which open in a couple of weeks. One is The Birthday Party, which was written in 1957, I think, and the other one is my last short play called Mountain Language. Both of them are about, finally, are to do with oppression, if you like, and the individual. And I think it's a very odd echo to find over all these years, to come across the fact that both plays are finally referring to the same thing. So in other words, this One for the Road has been around, as it were, for a long time. There's the bits of One for the Road I would have thought in The Birthday Party itself, as a matter of fact. But there was one specific thing which did bring it, actually caused me, those lines in the, I don't know if you have a program, but those there are a few written lines which started the shown there, and I wrote them in an absolute fury one night after a party when I met some young Turkish women who were talking about, they were living here, one of them I think, in England, one of them worked at the Turkish embassy in fact, and I asked them what they made of the torture which is widespread and still is to this very day in Turkey, our ally in NATO, by the way. You don't get headlines about that in the New York Times, I tell you. It has Turkey, which had then and has now the worst human rights record in Europe, given Iran, and also has more writers in prison now than anywhere else in the whole of Europe. And I asked these girls what they thought about the systematic and widespread torture that existed in Turkish prisons and police stations. And they said, well, you know, they're probably communists, you know. I mean, the people who are being tortured. And I was, I think, more or less speechless for a change. But I actually left the room at that point, went back and wrote one for the road. I just wrote it all in one night, as a matter of fact, and tried to, it was interesting for me to put it mildly, to try to find out what my imagination would find in response to that assertion on their parts, that because these people who were being arrested and tortured were apparently communists, they deserved to be tortured and, in fact, killed and mutilated. Later, when I went to Turkey on a wonderful, extraordinary trip with Arthur Miller, when I say wonderful, because it was simply because we met such remarkable people, and Arthur Miller was a great guy to be with too, and we actually met people who had been badly tortured and whose writers, academics, trade union people, and more to the point, we found that their families had really been destroyed. I met a man, I remember very well, the wife of a man who had been in prison, tortured, was quite speechless. She had lost the power of speech, and she wasn't able to speak at all. She was really, her mind had been paralyzed through the experience of observing her husband in prison. And when I therefore related that to the kind of attitude I think these girls embodied, of really rhetoric, nonsense, living in a fairy tale land where some people are punished and some are saved because the good and the bad and all the rest of it. That anyway, that's why I wrote the play.
What was the reason for the choice of having both the villain and the victim have the same name? It's Nicholas and Nicky is the boy.
I don't know.
Just happened.
Yes, I think one of the things, I'm sure any writers here would agree, that one of the remaining joys of writing, always ever present, is that when the thing's really going, you surprise yourself. I suddenly found the boy's name was Nicky. It's as simple as that, really.
Mm-hmm. Was Samuel Beckett's play Catastrophe at all an influence in writing it?
Oh, no, it wasn't, no. But I think it's a wonderful play. I don't think I knew it at the time, in fact, but it is marvelous, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your next project is writing a screenplay of Kafka's The Trial, and I wonder whether you could talk about that for a moment.
Yes, it's true, I'm afraid, yeah.
Why The Trial at this time?
Well, I read The Trial when I was a lad of 18, which is a hell of a long time ago now, and there it was in 1948, and it's been with me ever since. I don't think anyone who reads The Trial actually, that it ever leaves them, I would have thought. But although it can be curiously distorted by time, I find, speaking to a number of people, they now look back, who've read it, who remember it as having read it as young, when they were young, look back and think it's a political book, and think, oh, they rather tend to think it's like Arthur Koestler, you see. But in my view, it isn't at all. And that is why, I mean, and I wouldn't be interested in writing now, for example. I admire Koestler, but I simply wouldn't be interested in writing a screenplay of Darkness of Noon, for example. It's because it's so specifically of its time and place. But the trial is not the case at all. I find it very difficult to talk about, except that it has been with me for 40 years, and I've had a whale of a time over the last few months entering into that Kafka's world, which seems to me, I'll say one thing, if you like, that the nightmare of that world is precisely in its ordinariness, and that, I think, is what is so frightening and strong. But I'm having a very good time.
And you certainly are aware of Orson Welles' previous films.
Yes. Yes, I mean, Orson Welles was a genius, but I think that his film was quite wrong, actually, because he made it into an incoherent nightmare of spasmodic, half-adjusted lines, images, and so on. I mean, rather effects, in fact. And as I just said, I don't think that Kafka is at all about effects, but about something that happens on Monday, and then on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, and right through the week. In other words, this man in the trial is arrested one morning in his bed by two people, and he's then let out. He goes to his job, a case is taking place, there seems to be a kind of implacable but invisible force, and he's finally executed. But I must say the important thing about it is that he fights like hell all the way along the line. The trouble is, it reminds me in the sense of the shot in The Grapes of Wrath, John Ford's, the film of The Grapes of Wrath, when the man is protecting his shack and says, when the tractor comes up and says, if you go any further, I'll shoot your head off. And the fellow takes off his goggles and says, but you can't, there's no point in you doing that because I'm going to knock your house down, and if I don't do it, I'm getting paid for that, and I have a wife and kids, and if I don't do it, there'll be another guy who will. He says, well, I'll still do it. I'll still knock your head off. And he says, well, yes, and you're going to shoot the other guy's head off. He says, yes, absolutely. He said, but then you're going to go to the bank at Oklahoma City. He said, and you're going to shoot all them. And he says, I'll do something. And he says, yeah, but if you go to the bank in Oklahoma City, you'll only have to go to the bank then in New York, and how many people can you shoot? And he says, get out of my damn way. And he just knocks the house down. One of the most terrible sequences in cinema, I think, and a wonderful film, by the way, of course. But anyway, that's what I think Kafka's looking at. He's looking at who do you shoot? You know, it's as simple as that.
Would you ever have considered turning the trial into a play rather than a screenplay?
No. No, I can't do that. I've never adapted anything for the stage. I really can't. It's not my thing. I enjoy cinema very much, you see. I always have. I was brought up. I mean, two things happened to me at a very early age. Naturally, I fell in love, and I also found the cinema. There were actually two loves, the cinema and girls and sprinting, I think.
What was the last one again?
Sprinting.
Sprinting.
Yeah. I used to move fast in those days. But the cinema was a very, it was great, and always has remained so. So I've enjoyed all my work in the cinema without exception, actually. Mm-hmm. I think I'm very fortunate in that, of course, because I know what happens to writers normally working in the cinema the film industry. But I have been very fortunate. Mm-hmm. In the people with whom I've worked, I mean.
Right. The one play of yours that has not been revived with any great frequency is No Man's Land. And clearly that seems to me because of its identification with John Gielgud and Ralph Richardson. Mm. And I was wondering whether perhaps it wasn't time for a major revival. Then comes the question, who would be in it? After watching your performance tonight, I thought perhaps you as an actor-author might team up with someone like another actor-author like John Osborne or Alan Ayckbourn. Has that possibility ever arisen?
I'll bear that in mind, I think. Sure. No, the possibility has never arisen.
The play isn't done as much as the others, though, is it?
No, it was done after it was written in various countries like Germany, France, and Italy, where two great actors in each country said, this is for us, you know, mm-hmm. and they did it. But I think actors are generally frightened of the play, simply because of, as you've said, the ghosts of Richardson and the live ghost of Gielgud are still very much around. Mm-hmm. There's no one quite to touch them, of course.
Here's a question from the audience. I'm not sure you want to answer this one, but
I don't, I'm sure.
it happens to be in the top, and I will ask it. What is the job or responsibility of a theater critic?
Wouldn't you like to answer that question?
I think I'll pass on that. What other playwrights have you been influenced by? Asks a member of the audience.
It's rather difficult to say. I wasn't really... I started writing plays in 1957, so when I was 27, and up to that point I really hadn't seen many plays. I had, apart from Shakespeare, who was the great man, of course, and but I really was much more. I read modern. I read Dostoevsky and Kafka, in fact, and Joyce and Hemingway and all that crowd. You know, I was reading. So I don't know that I was much. I knew O'Casey, I think, but I don't know that could possibly be said I was influenced by him. And I knew a little Strindberg. I don't know. I just never asked myself that question, and I can't answer it now.
There's another question from the audience. Are there any plans to produce the Proust screenplay?
I'm afraid not. No, I'd love that to be done, but no, there aren't. For the simple reason that it's become so expensive over the years that I don't think anybody is going to. It's really not the kind of expensive picture that the film industry wants to do, I'm afraid.
And here's one more. How much of your character development is contrived, and how much, if any, solely the result of initial impulse or image? I'm not sure. I'll read that once more. How much of your character development is contrived, and how much, if any, solely the result of initial impulse or image?
I haven't the faintest idea, I'm afraid.
Here's one more. Do you read or talk your dialogue out loud when you're writing it?
I certainly do, yes. I never stop. If you were in my room, you would find me chattering away, you know. I always test it, yes. I mean, not necessarily at the very moment of writing, but just a couple of minutes later, you know.
And you laugh if it's a funny line?
I laugh like hell, yeah.
I think this is one we'll skip entirely. The last time that we talked, you said that you thought your attitude toward playwriting had changed, that you had gone away from, this is a quote, the idea of a narrative of a broad canvas stretching over a period of 2 hours. And I wonder if you've had second thoughts about that statement. That statement seemed to infer that you were not going to sit down and write what is generally known as a full-length play. But have you changed, or are you reconsidering that?
Well, it isn't a matter that's for me to reconsider. I actually, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to write any play, of whatever length. I don't think length is any more so important, really, anyway. But the one thing about the act of writing is it is an act of, essentially an act of freedom, as I understand it. So it's great to write anyway if you can do it, but it's not so. I just find it more and more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also a question of what is full length, and I suppose one might justify a 20-minute play as being full length if it gives the audience, in fact, a full experience while they're watching it.
It could be argued, and I'm sure a lot of people would argue strongly against it, because they could quite properly say, object to the fact that a 20-minute play simply doesn't, or a 30-minute play, doesn't allow the fullness and complexity of life to be given its full reign, and there may be something in that. I'm only concerned at the moment with accurate and precise images of what is the case, you know, of what is the case. I can no longer write a play about a family and what happens to it, at least except for the one for the road, I remind you. Is it actually, I didn't make it terribly clear at the beginning of my reading of One for the Road that I'm afraid that the the man, woman, and child are actually husband, wife, and he's their child. I don't know whether that was clear. Is that yes? Oh, good.
It was clear.
But so therefore, in a rather odd way, that play is about what happens to a family, and I think it really does happen to a hell of a lot of families now, and there seems to be no stopping it, and this one really draws attention to it. So they're coming back to, in a way, to what your question, which I didn't address myself to much earlier. Does the theatre affect the world in which we live? The answer must be, like, perhaps that little. But that little is something. Mm-hmm. And I respect the power of the correspondence between theatre and audience, in fact. And I think, I actually must make clear that I hate, I always have hated propaganda plays. I mean, what do you call that theatre? That's it. I walked out of more agitprop plays than you've had hot dinners. I mean, that's what. But I still, nevertheless, feel there is a role somewhere for a kind of a work which is not, in strict terms, following or pursuing the normal narrative procedures of the drama. Mm-hmm. And it's to be found, and I'm trying to find it.
Would you ever consider writing more directly about an immediate political situation? Even as you talked about Nicaragua, would you ever be inclined to write a play about that?
No, what I do about Nicaragua is make a lot of speeches about it and write quite a few articles about it, and I'm the chairman of the Arts for Nicaragua Fund in Great Britain, and I make a damn nuisance of myself. And that's what I do. You know. And that is the way I understand my role, as I said, as a citizen of both my country and the world, is to keep that up in the air. I think that to write a specific play, something about such a situation, is not something I could possibly do.
Mm-hmm. There's another question from the audience. How and when in its composition did the idea of telescoping or backward in time in Betrayal occur to you?
Betrayal. I think I wrote the first scene of Betrayal, which is the last scene in time, first, and that was that. So I had nowhere. I had to keep going in the other way.
I precede this question by suggesting that your answer be somewhat brief. Mr. Pinter, could you describe and update us on Clause 28?
Sure. Clause 28, for those who don't know, is an absolutely disgraceful law which has been passed by Parliament in England, which actually states that it's against the law to promote homosexuality, which in effect it has yet to be. It hasn't. No case has actually hit the courts yet. But in effect, as we understand it, it's a very, very dangerous law, because it means that if you promote homosexuality, by example, how do you do that, and what do you mean by it, and how do you define it? How is it to be interpreted by the law? So nobody quite knows that, and we're really concerned that it will affect. It will basically mean censorship of both books, theatre and film that are paid for by local government funds. B, it's on the way, it seems to me, to oppressing a considerable segment of the society. And as such, I think it's an absolutely deplorable and disgusting clause, and it's only one of the laws being passed every day of the week in my country, which is all to do with keeping a stranglehold on the populace, in my view. Mm-hmm. This applies to both the Official Secrets Act, in other words, the security services and to police powers and to a considerable amount of coercion and manipulation of television and the media. So there you are.
Thank you. Could you tell us about your meeting with England's former censor? Once you told me a story about running into someone who used to work in the Lord Chamberlain's office, and he commented on how things had changed in censorship.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes, the censor was the Lord Chamberlain, worked in St. James's Palace, as far as I remember. And he's finished in the 1960s, I think. And I had quite a bit to do with him with various plays of the time. Even the word arse was caused great problems then. And I met him, I bumped into him a few months ago, and he said, I thought something that was so accurate. He said, well, at least you knew where you were then, old boy. And I do believe that's right. We knew that certain words were out. Certain words you could argue about, but you didn't stand much of a chance and so on. But it was actually a debate. The whole thing was extremely silly, of course, but nevertheless, something was very clear about it. Now, I think, as applied to all the societies in which we live, censorship acts in a far more insidious way, because we're supposed to be living in what's called a free countries. And we don't have any censorship. We don't have a Lord Chamberlain anymore. You don't have, what do you have? You know. But how is power actually manifested through the state? How does it work? What is actually happening? And what, of course, invariably happens when things are as they are now, when we're told, when rhetoric really rules the day, is a great deal of self-censorship takes place because of fear and intimidation.
We actually have Jesse Helms here.
Yes.
He's our unofficial censor. I was wondering, since you're bringing back The Homecoming next year, which I gather is the 25th anniversary of the first production.
Yes, I'm very pleased about that.
Going back to the play, do you want to make any revisions or reevaluations of it? How do you feel about returning to The Homecoming?
I feel very good about it. I think it's just been revived, incidentally, in Chicago by the Steppenwolf Company, and I understand that it hasn't been. They've certainly not asked for any revisions, and I think they're enjoying themselves. But I think it stands up all right, and I'm looking forward to. It's very odd to think that play was done 25 years ago in 1965, and both Peter Hall, who's going to direct it in London, and I will be celebrating our 60th birthdays, you'll see, next year. Thank you very much.
So it's a triple anniversary, right?
Yeah, triple anniversary, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from the audience. Have you ever wondered what has drawn you to write plays full of darkness and psychological terror? Are you filled with darkness and psychological terror? You're smiling as your question is answered.
No, I like a good laugh, as we were saying earlier, and no, I'm not filled at all with darkness and. I think we all have. May I say, this is going to be a very profound remark. We all have a little bit of darkness within us, I think, don't you?
Again, as I note, said with a smile.
So, what do you say, Mel?
I think we... I think we've reached the end of our questions and questions. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts and access to our archive are made possible by the generous support of listeners like you. For more information on 92nd Street Y and all our programs, please visit us on the web at 92y.org. This program is copyright 1989 by 92nd Street Y.